So welcome everyone to Regenerative Agriculture and Equity in the Future of Food Production. I'm Stephanie and I'm from Ecotone Analytics. We have Naima joining us. So today I have four wonderful panelists with me who will each introduce themselves shortly. But I just want to remind everyone they can put comments in the chat, and at the end of our session, we will work through those questions. So please welcome Margot Conover, Senior Sustainability Analyst from General Mills.
Thanks, Stephanie, and hello, everyone. It's so wonderful to be here today talking about regenerative agriculture. I'm Margot Conover, and I am on the Global Sustainability team at General Mills. There, I work on our global water stewardship and packaging sustainability ambitions, and right now I'm leading our process on integrating regenerative agriculture into our approach to water stewardship, and really looking at how water impacts regenerative agriculture and how we can think about our commitments in a holistic way. And that holistic mindset is really what regenerative agriculture is all about for General Mills. For us, regenerative agriculture is important because we're a food company, and to make food, you need farmers. Also, about 50% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from agriculture, which is a huge part of that footprint. But through regenerative agriculture, we've been exploring ways that it's possible to actually shift agriculture from an impact on the planet that's creating more greenhouse gas emissions and climate change to something that's actually possible to help us sequester carbon in the soil. Conventional agriculture, which is what companies like ours have always relied on in the past, is really all about yield and maximizing it and treating farms like factories to maximize the output. But regenerative agriculture is a different way that we can approach it by thinking about farms as ecosystems. And to do that, in March of 2019, General Mills committed to advancing regenerative agriculture on 1 million acres of land by 2030. So for us, that looks like tackling agriculture in some of our most important ingredient crops, like the oats that go into Cheerios and Nature Valley bars, and then wheat and dairy, because we make a lot of products like cereal that have those ingredients as important. So we're supporting soil health academies to support farmers in our key sourcing regions in advancing regenerative agriculture on their own farms. So farms in the Great Plains in the US and Canada, Kansas and Michigan are through our program receiving one-on-one coaching and peer learning to implement regenerative agriculture principles on their farms. And then our agronomists are working with them to help them track outcomes in soil health, above ground biodiversity, water, my favorite, and farmer economic resilience, because it really doesn't matter what practices you're using on your farm ultimately if you don't see those regenerative outcomes coming to fruition. So for us, regenerative agriculture is an important way to help us address our greenhouse gas footprint, but we also see huge potential for enormous benefits way beyond our supply chain to the farmers and their communities and the ecosystems that they live in and that we all depend on to eat food and to live on this planet. And with that, I'll hand it over to Suzan.
Thanks, Margot. My name is Suzan Erem. I'm the Executive Director and one of the founders of the Sustainable Iowa Land Trust. Yes, we go by SILT. We're a statewide nonprofit that specializes in preserving regenerative or sustainable or natural food farms in perpetuity. The single act of permanently protecting a regenerative food farm becomes a Swiss Army knife of solutions to equity and inclusion, next generation land access, environmental degradation, climate change, food insecurity, obesity, and it's permanent. But regenerative ag, no matter what it's called in the future, must become more than a fad. This means serious investment in rebuilding a system we let atrophy over the last 50 years, the local food system. It means opportunity and innovation in small value-added processing of vegetables, fruits and nuts, portable and more local meat and poultry processing, creative but efficient transportation, cooling facilities that do less harm, modular on-farm processing and sales, and more. Why? Because regenerative ag needs a regenerative system, and a diversity of scale is a key component of that, as this pandemic has proven. Most importantly, making this kind of agriculture more than a fad means making it permanent. Land trusts are natural allies in this because we're the only kind of nonprofit in the country and under law that can make a forever promise like this. Land trusts suffer from a historic lack of diversity due to their focus, I believe, on protecting large swaths of natural land. SILT has diversity baked in. With help from the National Young Farmers Coalition, other land trusts are starting to retrofit themselves as well in this regard. SILT's affordable farms provide the opportunity for more people of color and working people to gain, and working people in general, to gain long-term access to farmland that grows food. The only requirements to get on a SILT farm: the inability to otherwise access land and a demonstrated passion for sustainable food farming. Then there's that small detail that you got to come live in Iowa. Not all food farms are regenerative. Not all small food farms are regenerative, and not all regenerative farms are small, as you can hear from Margot. But due to the nature of their market, small and/or independent farms tend to internalize the values of community and local accountability. To paraphrase an old saying, they don't spit where they eat. So can such farms make any difference in today's world? While philanthropy and government spend millions, if not billions, on urban and community gardens, farmers markets, the crucial work of rebuilding the local food system infrastructure, no one's recognizing that anyone who owns the land that grows the food can sell it to someone else who paves it over for some other use. And if you love your local food, you better save your local farm. If you don't think that makes a difference, try building this movement on a parking lot. We just need regenerative farms to make a bigger difference than our current extractive agriculture is making. That means extremely large regenerative farms growing a diversity of crops, which is what I hope is happening at the General Mills farms that Margot was talking about. But it also means an extremely high number of small-scale regenerative farms surrounding our metro areas and feeding our people there. We replicate this model across the country, and we fortify our fragile food system while solving a multitude of other problems that are keeping us back and keeping America from being what it could really be and truly feeding ourselves. Join us and help change the face of agriculture in the heartland and across the US. And I just want to refer you to silt.org and our social media to see more about what we're doing here and the way we can replicate this across the country. Now I'll pass this on to Lisa French.
Thanks, Susan. So my name is Lisa French, and I live in South Central Kansas, a little bit northwest of Wichita. And my husband and I farm in Reno County. We primarily raise some cash crops, but primarily grass-finished beef. But for the last 20 years, I've been the project coordinator for the Cheney Lake Watershed, which is a watershed scale organization, nonprofit that was started by farmers. We work in partnership with the city of Wichita to protect Wichita's primary water source, which is Cheney Reservoir. Wichita provides some financing for the project, but the farmers who are on our board are the ones that make decisions about how that money is spent. And they make decisions about the types of educational programming that we do. And they're the ones that are willing to go to their neighbors and talk to them about water quality issues as it relates to their farming practices. So that farmer leadership is a really critical part of what we do. But also this public-private partnership between farmers, the city of Wichita, and then also federal agencies that have also supported is another key part of that. We do lots of education and outreach programming. So we put on seminars for farmers throughout the year. We do a lot of field days and events. We provide some technical expertise, mostly helping farmers find the right person that can help them with whatever their question is. When the project first started, I would say that we primarily were focused on very conventional conservation practices, such as terraces and waterways, and just kind of the run-of-the-mill conservation work. But over the last 10 years, we've become just really much more concentrated on regenerative agriculture and soil health, because we think that that is probably overall, that's a more holistic look at water quality issues, and a way that we can, once we begin to talk about principles, farmers will figure out what practices will support those particular principles. So most all of our education geared around regenerative agriculture now, and really soil health is a big key to that. In the last year, we've gotten involved with General Mills. So when Margot talked about wheat farmers and the importance of that to General Mills, South Central Kansas is a primary wheat growing area. And so that made a natural connection with General Mills to begin to look at farming practices in this area. And I would say we have a lot of farming in this area that's not regenerative, so it's a good place to be working. And my work is a little bit different because I work on a watershed scale. So it's different than working with an individual landowner or just looking nationally. You know, we're looking at a very limited geographic area, and we need to make enough impact within that area over a period of time to impact water quality. And it's a thing that's measurable, and it's a challenge to make that much change. So we're really keyed in on this idea that farmers talk to each other, they talk to their neighbors, they see what each other's doing. We demonstrate things that people are trying and try to move the needle. There's a really strong culture within much of our watershed that's geared around, I would say, tidiness. And so sometimes regenerative agriculture doesn't always look tidy. You know, that many people's picture of stewardship is a really clean-tilled field. Even if you're seeing erosion, it's clean-tilled. And so there's a little bit of struggle with that to begin to change people's picture of what stewardship looks like, and that regenerative agriculture gets you a different picture. So I think that's pretty much all that I have to share right now. And we do use a lot of federal programs, and so we do try to make access, provide access to those programs wherever we can for farmers. And so we look for cost share opportunities wherever they are. I think I'll pass it on to Naima now to talk about the work that she's doing.
Thank you, Lisa. My name is Naima Dore, first generation farmer. Came to America when I was 8 from Somalia. Started my farming journey with my husband and 2 children in 2016. Initially started with a nonprofit that works with immigrants and first-time farmers called Minnesota Food Association. Now it's called Big River Farms out in St. Croix, Minnesota. So I've been operating my business, Naima's Farm LLC, for several years now. I'm in the process of purchasing farmland out in outside of the Twin Cities, 45 minutes from St. Paul. And the goal for me and my family is to introduce new crops to the state that are culturally specific, such as like leafy greens. And I recently established a nonprofit called Somali American Farmers Association. And the purpose of SAFA is to support Somali and immigrant farmers and focus on cultural specific organic produce and indigenous African farming practices. We are addressing a major social issue that we witness in Minnesota. Minority and low income communities have less access to fresh organic produce and lack information about the benefits of consuming fresh organic produce. And the goal, honestly, is just really to get more farmers participate in these programs, such as SAFA's and Big River, and just recruit more immigrant farmers to have control of what they're growing for their family and have access to fresh produce. With this land process that I'm going through, I'm purchasing through the FSA, which is the Federal Service Agency. you know, a lot of it I had to like navigate myself with no resource. So like I said, you know, I'm a first generation farmer. I know what I know, and I've been trying to collaborate with a lot of organizations that are in the ag world, and trying to find resources to push this agenda that I have for not just for my family, but for my community as well. Pass on to Stephanie.
Stephanie's having trouble and she's asking Margot to take over.
Did it
Oh,
work?
maybe she,
Am I back?
there she is.
There it is.
All right, just in time. So I'm Stephanie. I'm an analyst at Ecotone Analytics. We do impact analysis, taking those intangible impacts and communicating them as measurable outcomes. We did a social and environmental return on investment for regenerative agriculture in the Cheney Lake watershed, which is in south central Kansas. We worked with Lisa French on that project, but in that project, we defined regenerative agriculture as a holistic, principles-based approach to farming and ranching that intentionally enhances and protects natural resources and farming communities. And since it is that principles-based approach rather than practice-based, there can be a lot of variability in how it's implemented. So one of the goals of our project was to help identify what research exists on regenerative agriculture, research done by those in agronomy, natural sciences, social sciences, and really just understand how much certain impacts and outcomes can be attributable to regenerative agriculture practices. So our analysis found it's shared across multiple stakeholders like farmers, community members, taxpayers, water users, and identifying that range of stakeholders and the metrics influencing costs and benefits are key to that larger goal of just increasing the recognized value of social and environmental impacts. So while a monetization point might not be the end goal, identifying those stakeholders and how much they can benefit can be helpful in building that coalition. So something like cost sharing, which can help incentivize experimentation in farming practices, and it can help mitigate risk of decreased income due to adopting those practices. But funding can be hard to get and difficult, might not be a long-term solution. So by identifying those who benefit, who might not have originally been involved, it can just help build that engaged network supporting farmers. And regenerative agriculture is deserving a lot more attention in research right now. And what we know about it today can be useful in creating goals or making long-term decisions. So we can track continuous improvement. And this is important to help just guide conversations around what challenges exist, develop strategies to reach those goals, all with the understanding that certain outcomes occur at different timescales. So on-farm benefits, for example, might not pay off in the first year, but rather over multiple. And just more generally, systematic change doesn't happen immediately. So by identifying key metrics and using them to benchmark, we can hold various stakeholders accountable and just support that continuous improvement and ultimately transformation. So there's a lot going on in regenerative agriculture as a movement, and as a principles-based approach, there is a lot of opportunity. So I want to turn it back to Naima and just ask her more about the work she's doing to bring seeds to Minnesota and incorporate organic and indigenous farming practices on her farm.
Thank you, Stephanie. So recently I was able to obtain seeds that are native to Somalia or East Africa from the USDA seed bank. And my goal is to grow them next year and test and see how they will adapt to this climate, and as well to introduce a new market to the state of Minnesota. I think a lot of folks in my community want something that is that they could connect to back home. And I think this is a good way to not only just to get them to eat healthier vegetables, but to really have access, if we're talking about ways that folks could access to the market and get to products that they're familiar with and they're accustomed to.
Yeah, that's really exciting, and bringing new seeds will be really interesting, and I think kind of speaks to that building a broader network and I want to turn it then to Lisa and Suzan and ask, just in the work you've been doing with farmers and communities, what kind of partnerships are you seeing form around regenerative agriculture, and how has it helped generate support for farmers to adopt some of those principles or have that ability to experiment a little bit more? Lisa, if you want to start.
Okay, yeah, I'll jump in there first. Of course, right now, the most visible one is that we're working with General Mills. And so that has been, I think, a real opportunity for us to make some change on a larger scale rather than just individual farms. General Mills is providing mentorships between farmers who will work with, I think right now we have somewhere between 24 and 30 different farms that are in the mentorship program, and they meet regularly with their mentor and talk through some of the changes they're making on their farm and have an opportunity to kind of think through all the nuts and bolts of what's going to happen, or when there's a problem, why is it happening? We also are doing, we're continuing some of the things that we have done within the watershed, but we're drawing those same farmers into a discussion group that meets fairly regularly so that they can talk with each other and share their ideas and maybe work through some of the issues. That is a real key to making sure that they have the opportunity to have someone who supports them, and they know that they're not the only one that's doing weird things out here. You know, they're all trying some new things together. That has been really critical. There also looks like we'll have the opportunity to maybe try out the market for carbon credits or water quality credits, something like that. And that's going to be very new for the farmers here. So we're going to work through it and see what it's going to do. So that's an important partnership. As I said before, we have partnership also with the City of Wichita and with a number of state and federal agencies that are interested in seeing what's going to happen here. And I think that we're looking at a potential partnership between NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, which is part of USDA, and maybe with General Mills on continuing the kind of work that General Mills is doing now and that we've been doing for the last 10 or 15 years on regenerative agriculture. So I see good things ahead, and I'm really excited about putting, the synergy that you get from private industry, public agencies, and groups of individual farmers. So it's fun. I'm excited to see what's going to come next.
At Silt, we have some unusual partnerships as well as some of the usual suspects. So some of our favorites are especially Practical Farmers of Iowa, that really extends beyond Iowa, but does an excellent job of farmer to farmer education. And it's a big umbrella organization, but there's a pretty high number of farmers who wish to farm more sustainably or regeneratively in that group. And so they're often and they also have an excellent beginning farmer program going. So they're often our first go-to in terms of finding folks who want to farm on silt land. As well as with Moses, the Midwest Organic Organization, Land Stewardship Project in Minnesota, Center for Rural Affairs, et cetera. We have allies all the way around Iowa. But I think the more surprising partnership is with the real estate industry. We can make an argument that regenerative farms are neighborhood friendly, that we can build a circle. We're starting a Circle Our Cities initiative in the next year or two that's coming out of our accelerator program, where we talk about having farms surrounding every one of our cities that can feed the people in those cities. In Iowa, on Iowa soil, we can grow enough fruits and vegetables to feed 200 people per acre per year. So we know that we can do it. It's a question of political will as well as landowner will and having enough farmers to do it. So in a strange way, the real estate industry becomes our partner because they may even help us protect a certain amount of farmland as they continue to grow farther and farther from the city center. It's kind of an interesting partnership that way. And of course, we partner with NRCS, which is funding our full-time farm specialist, who is re-educating the landscape and the farmers and the landowners about how table food can grow on their land sustainably. And so he goes out and talks to landowners about peaches and pears and chestnuts and heart nuts, which are things that I grow here at our place, and honeyberries and apples and also annual crops that we allow to grow on flat ground, but not on slopes. And in that way, we begin the conversation about what else Iowa can look like besides the 2 crops that it grows now. And we hope, and NRCS hopes, that more of its programs that aren't used very much nowadays will come back into fashion and allow these farmers to try what they consider new crops now that they're the generation that grew up with corn and soybeans.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating to hear about the different partnerships you have. And I think especially with real estate, sort of an untraditional path just to protect farmland, which seems natural, but it's more of just a reimagining how to move forward in regenerative agriculture as a movement. And so I want to turn it over to Margot and just ask, kind of similarly, like, what initiatives and strategies have you seen organizations or supply chain actors embed in their business that transforms regenerative agriculture, or just agriculture, from potential negatives to positive opportunity?
Well, I love thinking about it in terms of partnership, even when you're talking about supply chain actors, and in our case, I would say the most important innovators and partners in regenerative agriculture for us are the farmers that we're working with. They're the ones that are really doing all of this transformation. They're figuring it out. Like I think it was Lisa who was saying that and Stephanie, you too, were saying that the science kind of needs to catch up with some of this innovation and experimentation that farmers are doing. And then what we can do to support that as a business is really think about how to close the gap between that, to get that innovation off the farm and into a box of product and into somebody's home as they're making food in their own kitchen, or they're putting a bar in their purse to have a snack on the road or whatever. So General Mills has tried to do that with a couple of our products that are directly sourced back to the farms that grow the ingredients. So for example, Annie's mac and cheese has a couple of everyday Planet First, we call them mac and cheese SKUs, where we work with 4 farmers in Montana who grow the wheat, peas, and spelt that are in the box of mac and cheese. And then people who are cooking it in their kitchen can read about regenerative agriculture on the back of the box while they're cooking it, and then taste what regenerative agriculture tastes like, and share it with their families. Another example of that where we've tried to experiment is with meat, which, as everyone knows, is horrible for the environment. You know, cows are like the #1 villain in climate change and agriculture. But we're working with an amazing, innovative farmer in Georgia, Will Harris, who owns White Oak Pastures, a regenerative ranch. And he has been pioneering over the past 25 years a 10 species rotation, where he does regenerative grazing on formerly degraded cropland. And in 2018, we worked with a third-party consultant, Qantas, to do a life cycle analysis of his beef, and actually identified that the cows on his ranch are sequestering carbon in the soil instead of emitting it like normal cows that are raised in a degenerative confinement system. So those are just a couple of small examples where we've strived to get that into our direct supply chain. But there's so many other companies that are innovating, like Dr. Bronner's and Patagonia, who are doing amazing work to figure out how to get regeneratively grown food and textiles actually in people's hands in their home, and educate consumers about how to support this through their purchases. This work is really about helping to get it to scale, and it's not easy. Commodity supply chains did not evolve for this. They evolved to be very faceless and anonymous, and oriented towards being as cheap as possible, cheaper and cheaper every year. So our innovation, I think, as a company, and what we would love to see from other folks, is just thinking about how to build that supply chain and how to re-evolve the system so that it supports those changes that we want to see. So I guess thinking about a spectrum of degenerative on one side and regenerative on the other, we have to ask ourselves, where is our business currently falling, and where do we want it to fall in the next 5, 10, 20 years? How can we reimagine that business model so that everyone from the farmers who are growing the food to the consumers that are buying it and eating it are partners along that spectrum of transformation? So yeah, that looks different for every company, but part of what's exciting about regenerative agriculture, I think, is that ability to see your context and really see, here's where I can do changes and implement something that's going to change this little piece that I have control over and influence on. So that's going to look super different for General Mills or for another company or for a farmer, but there's enough work for all of us to go around.
Yeah, I think I'll just echo your excitement there. I think reimagining just generally the food system as an ecosystem, even down to on farm as an ecosystem, and creating those relationships among people, the ground, plants, and animals, like just an exciting way to just reimagine what we can do with the space. So with that, I guess I just want to say we're nearing the end of our panel. If anyone in the audience has questions, please put them in the chat. We're happy to go through them. I'd also like to thank our panelists just for sharing their ideas and views on regenerative agriculture. With that, though, we can move to Naima. Are there any current initiatives going on at the Somali American Associations or things you're hoping to do in the future?
Yes. So one of the things that we're trying to hopefully kick off next year is to do a fellowship program where it's intergenerational farming practices between elders and youth here in the Twin Cities. And we hope to start that programming next season. And that pretty much will allow folks to, from our community, to engage and participate in our workshops and lessons in farming, particularly indigenous African farming.
That sounds really exciting and a lot of stuff going. Then maybe back to Lisa and Suzan. Have any of your outreach efforts changed since the pandemic, just in terms of how you have operated, how you've shared materials, education events, things like that?
We were probably the first nonprofit in Iowa to start live events online. It was 4 days after Iowa shut down. But we were not, we didn't stay ahead of that. And organizations that were much better funded were able to really take it to the next level. So we stopped doing that because they were doing it so well in terms of teaching people more about local food or regenerative agriculture and other things. They were doing a great job. We ended on a high note. We had Francis Morlape on one of our little chats. You know, we can't risk the health of our people. Our people tend to be older landowners who come and support our work at local events. So it's all been by phone and email with check-in calls to see how they're doing and just maintaining the relationship. We already had land in the works for protection, and it looks like we're on target for those to protect them by the end of this year. You can see our Adopt an Acre program at silt.org, where we've got people adopting an acre at a time of our 4 projects. And we just hope that the relationships sustain themselves. Our farm specialist is still out walking property at a safe distance with our landowners, so we do hope to have more projects next year. But this is a hard hit. It's hard on everyone. And I guess the only other thing we've changed excuse me, that's my dog. I told him to stay quiet. He did pretty well. Was that I have to thank everyone who's been out in the streets this summer. I can't go out there like I would have because my husband is at risk, at high risk for COVID. So I want to thank the people who hit the streets, because when we talk about land access, I always just assume that people get it, that if it's more affordable, people of all colors and backgrounds will be able to access it. But it seems that doesn't seem so obvious to everyone. So Black Lives Matters and other organizations have allowed us to bring that to the forefront and say, hey, folks, really, it means everyone is welcome to our farms and have access. Because I'm so sorry. I'm just going to shut up now.
So I'll talk a little bit about what it's meant for us. So we work primarily with farmers, and there's a broad range of their abilities to join us via Zoom or webinars, and a range of tolerance for a certain amount of that. So I know that a lot of the farmers we're working with are already doing YouTube a lot to watch, to listen to things that they're interested in related to regenerative agriculture. So that continues, and we try to give them as much information as we can about things that they can watch and see. But we also were blessed in that our area has very low infection rates, and because we're very rural and we don't have high population density, we've been able to do some outdoor things this summer, just with but small groups. We usually do a big event with about 300 people during the summer, and we just said, well, that's not going to happen this year. And so we have done some small things with little field days, or we did one, we typically do a discussion group with these farmers, and we have it indoors, and we have lunch or snacks or something. And we tried one that was outdoors, bring your lawn chair and we'll just sit at a distance. But it turns out that didn't work quite the way we thought it would work, because when you're spread out, you can't hear each other very well. So we ended up just talking to the people next to us, which was another good thing. So people sought out the person they needed to talk to. And we're looking at what's going to happen in the winter. I think we'll probably do more, creating some videos, or probably just less in-person kinds of things. But we'll get through this year, and we'll continue to provide farmers with information about cost share programs and technical expertise, and giving them examples of things that they can try, and it'll work fine. The farmers' work is continuing no matter what. So we'll get through it. They just won't hear as much from us probably through the next year.
Yeah, so it sounds like you've both been fairly adaptable and still been able to do the critical work that you're doing, which is really important. So I guess then I'm just wondering, Margot, if you've seen how either regenerative ag or just in general adjustments to supply chain can have a positive effect on being resilient in times of uncertainty.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's one that's on our mind, especially in light of climate change, and COVID is kind of like allowing us to test some of that resiliency and see if it comes out. I guess I'll go back to the example of White Oak Pastures, that meat supplier. So one of the great things about working with them, even in COVID, is that they have their own very tiny meat processing facility on the farm, which helps that community be more resilient, as so many processing plants have been hit really hard by COVID. They've been able to stay insulated from that because it's located in the rural community, and in the same place that the animals are being raised. So they're not getting affected as acutely as some of the other places, like with other meat companies that are seeing big infection rates. And then we've been lucky that as more people are eating in their homes, General Mills has actually been able to continue to do business pretty much as usual. And it's been a kind of a cool opportunity for us to show our suppliers that kind of partnership that I was mentioning. So one of the first things that the company did when all of the lockdowns began, was reach out to every supplier to make sure that they had a safety plan in place to protect their workers first and foremost, so that we were ensuring that no one in our supply shed was going to be put at risk in order to make these products. And then one plug that I thought I would say, so a change that we've all been experiencing is that we're all at home. And so probably more people are watching Netflix right now. And Kiss the Ground just released a documentary on soil health and regenerative agriculture 2 days ago on Netflix. It's really oriented towards consumer engagement and education on what this can mean for our food system and our planet. So if you're at home and you're watching more Netflix than usual, then put that on the list.
Thank you, Margot. I haven't seen it. Definitely will add that to the list. But I would just want to open it up to all of you and say, is there any other final words you want to leave our audience with?
I would like to say that, when farmers make these changes on their farm, it's not easy, and there is a certain amount of risk involved. And so it's really important for the broader community to be supportive in whatever way, whether it's through federal programs or if it's through the purchasers of the products, or making those connections individually with individual farmers. All those things are really helpful as farmers begin this journey, because it looks different than what they've done before, and it's a different way of marketing sometimes. So whatever support that they can get from the broader community is really critical in driving changes.
I would just like to add that the more affordable we can make this food generated from regenerative and sustainable farms, the higher adoption there'll be. I mean, it shouldn't be cheaper to eat bad food than to eat good food. And I also think that we have a lot to learn from our Somalian brothers and sisters, as well as others who have been growing food in some of the hardest places to grow food in the world and surviving. And we here in the US need to get a little, just a little more humility in what we can learn from others about growing food without chemicals, without GMOs. Not that has to be the only thing, but if we diversify our ag economy, we'll be more resilient. We know that. And to make room for learning from folks who know better than we do how to grow table food for our communities. I just think we need to keep that in mind.
So maybe a follow-up question for you, Suzan, from Casey. Do you think the U.S. needs to shift subsidies to make these practices more affordable?
Ultimately, I believe regenerative farming will be exactly what it should be, which is supporting itself. But so long as the subsidies are so heavily weighed towards other practices, it'll always look expensive, and it'll be the slower, lower choice. Solving climate change is simply not at front and center of a mom who has to decide whether to feed her kids, pay the healthcare, pay the rent, or the utilities. So, we have to find a better balance. And I think in the short term, that means shifting the subsidies to the farmers who are doing more than what you can monetize. Although Ecotron's doing a pretty good job of showing us how to monetize it, which is great. I want to hire you guys, but we have to find more incentives for those farmers so that they can compete on a level playing field with the folks who are working with heavily subsidized systems.
To Lisa's point, I was going to add, supporting farmers. Another thing that always I have to keep in mind is no waste. When I start off the season, I always mindful of my production and what I want to grow to avoid waste. And oftentimes I see a lot of farmers who might not maybe start off strong in the beginning and have a strong market, but something could go wrong, right? And then and my concern is avoiding waste. And so I think that the more support local folks, farmers can get, the better way to avoid waste. So that was a really good point in regards to supporting farmers.
Well, thank you, Naima, for adding that. I think it's definitely a good thing to be mindful of. And so I just want to thank you all again for joining our panel and thank everyone for watching. But it has been wonderful. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks for moderating.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.